After finishing my night shift, I caught the last bus home. As we passed through a deserted mountain area, a strange voice suddenly came over the speaker and began reading the bus rules. Anyone who is sitting down, die. One passenger stuck his head out and cursed at the driver for such a cruel joke. The very next second, a jet of blood suddenly sprayed from his neck, and he collapsed dead in the blink of an eye. Fear exploded throughout the bus. Someone had just died. Even more terrifying, before I could recover from the shock, agonized screams began erupting one after another. Several bus windows were stained a hazy red. Every passenger who had been sitting in a seat was dead. Not a single one survived. Only those who had been standing remained frozen in place. Witnessing such a bloody scene made my stomach churn. My legs went weak, and I nearly collapsed onto the floor. Two co-workers standing beside me, Ryan and Jason, quickly grabbed me. Thanks to them, I managed to stay on my feet. We worked at the same company and got along very well, so we rented a house together in the suburbs. Jason warned me never to sit down. Ryan pulled out his phone and tried to call the police. However, everyone on the bus soon realized in horror that none of our devices had any signal. Extreme tension spread through my body. I could still hear the engine roaring without pause. A question suddenly occurred to me: where was the driver? Why hadn't he stopped the bus after something this serious had happened? But when we moved closer, we discovered that the driver showed no reaction at all. His face was completely expressionless. Even stranger, beyond the windshield was nothing like the suburban route we were supposed to be traveling through. Instead, the bus had entered a dark, dense forest. Thick fog surrounded us on all sides, and the shadowy outlines of trees flashed past in the distance. Someone tried to rush forward and restrain the driver, but just as they were about to act, the speaker came alive again. Welcome to the Spirit Route bus. If you wish to survive, please follow the rules. The bus fell completely silent. Everyone held their breath. Rule 1. Please be advised that this bus will not stop at any stations along the route, nor will it open its doors. Anyone who attempts to leave on their own will die. Rule 2. Each time we arrive at a new station, a new rule will appear on the bus. Please listen carefully and obey it strictly. Failure to do so will result in immediate death. Rule 3. Touching or attacking the driver in any form is strictly prohibited. Violators will bear the consequences themselves. Rule 4. This route has a total of 7 stops. Only those who survive until the very end will be able to leave safely. After hearing the rules, even those who had been burning with anger were forced to calm down. The passenger who had died suddenly a moment ago was proof of what happened to anyone who broke the rules. If we wanted to stay alive, we had no choice but to remain on this bus, continue forward, and complete whatever tasks the rules demanded. There was a fireworks show in the city tonight, so even though this was the last bus of the night, it was packed with passengers. No one had expected that the cheerful, relaxed atmosphere on the bus would transform into a ride straight to hell within moments. The terror made me furrow my brow. Jason gently patted my shoulder. Don't get too nervous. If we want to survive, we have to stay calm. Looking at the two of them standing by my side, I finally felt a little reassured. After enduring the suffocating atmosphere for 10 minutes, the station chime finally sounded through the speaker. Not only that, but the voice on the speaker deliberately announced, in a tone of mock regret. As for the number of fatalities, what a pity. 21 passengers died at the departure station. All passengers are required to firmly grasp a hanging hand strap and suspend themselves in the air. Anyone who touches any other object will die. This second rule was clearly a test of physical strength and endurance. The hanging straps were positioned high above us, rough and uncomfortable to grip. Remaining suspended in the air for 10 minutes without relying on any other support would undoubtedly be a prolonged form of torture. Especially for office workers like us who rarely exercised. Just as I was worrying about it, Ryan slapped both Jason and me on the back. "Move now. Jason, hurry up. Get up there and grab a hand strap first." His words startled me for a moment. But after glancing around the bus, I immediately understood what he meant. The entire bus had only a little over 20 hanging straps installed. Yet there were 37 survivors still on board. There simply weren't enough for everyone. Thinking of that, I hurriedly jumped up and reached for one of the straps. No matter how awkward my position was, I just needed to get myself hanging first. In less than 10 seconds, every hanging strap had been claimed. As time began to run out, the passengers still standing could no longer keep their composure. They targeted everyone who had already secured a place above. They shoved, yanked, and even punched and kicked without restraint. The scene instantly descended into chaos. Quite a few people who had already settled into position were dragged back down onto the bus floor. To keep from being pulled down, I forced myself to climb even higher. I curled both legs up and wrapped my entire body around the metal bar running across the ceiling. Pulling the strap close against my chest, I used both my hands and feet, clinging to it like a sloth gripping a tree trunk. At the same time, I kept shouting to Ryan and Jason, signaling for them to do the same. At one point, a buzzcut man even tried to drag me down. But after realizing I was positioned too high for him to reach, he gave up after several seconds of trying. All he could do was glare at me with hatred in his eyes. I remember hearing a sharp crack before he threw himself into a fight somewhere else. Although I took a few painful punches from him and my back burned with pain, I finally breathed a sigh of relief. Then the countdown ended. A series of soft beeps sounded through the bus. I quickly lowered my legs, making sure that my only point of contact remained the hanging strap. Turning my head, I saw that the passengers who were still fighting each other began disappearing one after another without a trace. A sudden icy wind swept through the bus. Those who had failed to secure a strap instantly stiffened. Their eyes were filled with terror. Their bodies were slowly erased by the freezing gust until they vanished completely into nothingness. The sight sent chills down my spine. My grip on the strap tightened even further. The bus rattled and swayed along the road. To avoid falling, I kept both arms hooked through the strap, locking it in place with my elbows. The position was agonizing, and bruises soon formed around my joints. But the sense of security it provided helped calm me somewhat. As time passed, the exhaustion and pain became increasingly intense. I could only rely on my desire to survive to keep holding on. Just when I was about to reach my limit, the station chime I had been waiting for finally rang out. "We have arrived at the third station." What a pity. 17 passengers died during the second station. But before we could relax for long, the third rule emerged from the speaker. Bus rule number 3, all passengers must crawl underneath any seat within 3 minutes. Movement is prohibited until the next station is reached. Violators will die. After hearing the rule, everyone on the bus breathed a sigh of relief. Unlike the first 2 trials, which had caught us completely off guard, this time we were finally given 3 minutes to prepare. There was no need to run around in panic like headless flies. Moreover, the task didn't seem particularly difficult. There were 21 seats on the bus, while only 20 passengers remained alive. The scene of desperate infighting over limited spots would no longer happen. However, while the rest of us were secretly relieved, Ryan kept his brows tightly furrowed. "I have a feeling there's something more to this." The dim lights inside the bus flickered faintly. Ryan's words sent a chill down my spine. After thinking for a moment, he briefly explained his theory. "We've all already walked through the gates of death twice. Everyone knows how dangerous the first 2 trials were. It's not hard to see that these rules are designed to push us toward death, while leaving only a narrow path to survival. But this third trial doesn't fit that pattern at all. There are 20 passengers and 21 seats available. So I think the key to this trial is probably hidden in the last few words of the rule. Hearing that, I instinctively recalled the announcement from the speaker. You mean the part that says, movement is prohibited until the next station? Ryan nodded. Exactly. I think something unexpected is very likely to happen during the journey to the next station. Once everyone chooses a seat, there will be no chance to regret it and no chance to run away. So I believe the challenge this time isn't about fighting for a spot. It's about making the right choice. If you happen to choose the wrong seat, then you may have stepped into a dead end from the very beginning. Listening to Ryan reasoning, the tension that had just eased instantly returned. Looking around, I noticed that nearly half of the passengers had already chosen seats and crawled under them. Time was running out. Ryan hurriedly patted our shoulders. Go search around. See if there are any clues. Check the ceiling, under the seats, or the sides of the windows. For the next few minutes, we continuously searched for any traces of clues. However, even when there was only 1 minute left, we still found nothing. We exchanged glances. We truly had no idea what danger was hidden behind this rule. In the end, we could only choose a few remaining empty spots. But just as I was about to crawl under a seat, something suddenly caught the corner of my eye. The driver, who had remained motionless the entire time, suddenly let go of the steering wheel. The driver? What was he planning to do? Sensing that something was wrong, I quickly moved forward. Through the reflective glass, I could see the upper half of his body. After taking both hands off the wheel, he quietly pulled a heavy iron hammer out from a corner and slowly wiped it clean. And for the first time, a strange smile appeared on his deathly face. Watching his bizarre actions, I couldn't help glancing back at those flimsy plastic seats. Suddenly, I understood the true intention behind this rule. Oh no! Seeing that only 30 seconds remained, I frantically looked toward Ryan and Jason, who were not far away. The two of them had already curled themselves completely beneath their seats. I didn't have time to stop and explain. I could only hurriedly drag both of them out. Run to the back. Stay as far away from the driver as possible. Although neither of them understood what was happening, they immediately followed close behind me. We crawled beneath the last row of seats at the back of the bus. Unfortunately, that area had long since become packed with people. There was only a single empty spot left. The countdown was about to end. I took a deep breath of cold air. We're short on space. What do we do now? Ryan hesitated for a moment before answering. Let's squeeze into the same spot. That answer was completely outside my expectations. Up until then, everyone had assumed that the rule meant one person per seat. As he squeezed his way toward the back, Ryan explained. The rule never says that people can't make the same choice. It also doesn't forbid physical contact with others like the second trial did. As long as there's a seat directly above your head, you probably won't be eliminated. Not long afterward, with Ryan's help, Jason and I were stuffed together beneath a single seat. Although it was so cramped that my entire body felt uncomfortable, at least we managed to fit inside. As for Ryan, he quickly squeezed into a gap beside the row of seats ahead together with another unfamiliar passenger. Fortunately, that passenger seemed fairly easygoing and showed no objection to his actions. At the same time, the 3-minute countdown came to an end. Everyone held their breath, silently awaiting the trial's judgment. The roar of the engine continued, but the driver, who had remained silent the entire time, suddenly stood up from his seat. Holding a massive iron hammer, he slowly turned around. With a sinister smile on his face, he walked toward the seat closest to him. Without wasting a single word, he raised the hammer high and slammed it down with brutal force. Again. And again. And again. From my position, I couldn't see where the blows were landing. All I could hear were the passengers' agonizing screams. I could hardly imagine what had become of that person. Only after the first passenger's cries finally fell silent did the driver stop. Then he walked over to another seat and swung the hammer once more. Facing such a suffocating and oppressive scene, it didn't take long before some people could no longer endure it and tried to crawl out from under their seats to escape toward the back of the bus. But without exception, every one of those who crawled out early was grabbed by the neck by the driver and thrown back, forced to return to their original positions. Other than helplessly watching themselves get beaten to death by the hammer, there was simply no other way out. Even in my wildest dreams, I had never imagined that 10 minutes could feel so endlessly long. We have arrived at the fourth stop. What a pity. 13 passengers died during the previous stop. 7 passengers remain alive. By the time I awkwardly crawled out from beneath the seat, my body had already begun to go numb. Not only because of the pain from maintaining the same position for so long, but even more because of the lingering terror. The driver had swung his hammer in order from nearest to farthest, targeting each passenger hiding beneath the seats until the station bell finally rang. Only then did he quietly return to the driver's seat and resume his vacant, lifeless expression. Behind me, Jason and Ryan also struggled out from beneath their seats. The shock of narrowly escaping death was written all over their faces. Yet after barely a few dozen seconds of rest, the loudspeaker impatiently crackled to life again, as if unwilling to grant us any real chance to catch our breath. It began announcing a new rule. Congratulations on making it halfway through the journey. Bus rule number 4. The next section of the route is rather complicated. Every 30 seconds, the driver will randomly select one passenger to determine the direction of the next turn. Please choose either left or right. Anyone who chooses incorrectly will die on the spot. If the total number of wrong answers exceeds 3, the driver will completely lose his sense of direction. Everyone on the bus will die as well. Please answer carefully. After a burst of static, the loudspeaker fell completely silent. The bus immediately sank into a heavy silence. Although the announcement had been lengthy, it could essentially be summarized in a single word. Choice. Every 30 seconds, the driver would randomly call on a passenger. Choose left or right. Choose incorrectly, and you die. And that wasn't even the most terrifying part. There was an additional condition. If the total number of wrong choices reached 3, everyone on the bus would die together. The problem was that, from where we stood, all we could see outside the windows was a thick, chaotic blanket of fog. We couldn't even tell where the road was. Trying to make any meaningful judgment about upcoming turns was nearly impossible. The only option was blind guessing. Between each stop, the bus traveled for a full 10 minutes. Moreover, every 30 seconds, another passenger would be questioned. That meant that during the entirety of the fourth trial, the driver would ask us approximately 20 questions. Being allowed to make only 2 mistakes at most made the difficulty of this challenge seem almost impossible. Beside me, Ryan couldn't help letting out a quiet sigh. From a probability standpoint, we almost certainly won't survive to the next trial. For a moment, despair and pessimism began to spread among the survivors. Even worse, before we had fully calmed ourselves, the driver had already begun the first round of questioning. The young man with the buzz cut in the crowd. Startled, it was obvious that the person being called was Brandon Miller. After being selected, he hurriedly scrambled toward a window, desperately trying to gather some information from outside. But all he could see was a vast expanse of white. There were no signs, landmarks, or any clues that could indicate direction. Time slipped away rapidly inside the suffocating bus. You have 5 seconds left. Left or right? The driver's urging sounded like a death sentence. Brandon Miller clenched his fists and gritted his teeth. In the end, he could only gamble on a random answer. Left. The driver silently shook his head and turned the steering wheel to the right. The loudspeaker crackled to life. The choice is incorrect. The current total number of wrong answers is 1. The moment the announcement ended, a gigantic clawed arm smashed through the window. Reaching in from the left side of the bus, it lunged forward, grabbed the panicking Brandon Miller, and dragged him straight into the pitch-black fog outside. "Help!" His scream echoed through the air before quickly fading away. The driver had only been traveling along the straight road for about 10 seconds before speaking again. "The next intersection is approaching. Passenger Daniel Brooks is required to make a choice within 20 seconds. As soon as those words were spoken, the passenger standing closest to us became so frightened that he nearly lost control of himself. He was the same man who had earlier shared his hiding space with Ryan. Daniel Brooks didn't even bother looking outside anymore. Instead, he desperately turned toward Ryan and me, his eyes pleading for help. Perhaps our performance so far had convinced him that we were some kind of lifeline. Unfortunately, we were completely clueless ourselves. A trace of guilt flashed across Ryan's face, but he could only sigh helplessly. "Sorry. I don't have any clues either." Under the driver's familiar pressure, Daniel Brooks could only abandon any attempt to figure things out and choose based purely on instinct. He picked the opposite direction from Brandon Miller. "Right." Once again, the driver silently shook his head. The loudspeaker crackled to life. "The choice is incorrect. The current total number of wrong answers is 2. The giant bloody hand appeared again, smashing through the window on the right side of the bus. It seized the desperately struggling Daniel Brooks and dragged him away, leaving behind nothing but heart-wrenching screams. The atmosphere inside the bus became even more oppressive and suffocating. No one had expected that after only 2 rounds of answers, the entire margin for error would already be gone. Yet there were still more than a dozen questions waiting for us. From this moment onward, not a single mistake could be made. Amid the tension that stretched tighter than a drawn bowstring, the driver began the 3rd round. "The next intersection is approaching. Passenger Ethan Carter is required to make a choice within 20 seconds. The moment I heard that, I froze in shock. Because Ethan Carter was my name. I kept taking deep breaths, trying to force myself to stay calm and think carefully, but I simply could not find any solution. Faced with this unsolvable problem, I was no different from the 2 people before me. I had already more or less picked a random direction in my mind. Just as I was about to surrender myself to fate, the usually silent Jason suddenly spoke. He pointed at the shattered pieces of glass on both sides of the bus. "Don't rush yet. I have an idea." Before I could even press him for details, Jason swiftly climbed onto the window ledge on the right side. He stuck his head outside as if searching for something. Perhaps because his view was limited, after muttering to himself, he leaned his entire body out of the window, clinging to the exterior of the bus while hooking only the tips of his feet onto the edge of the frame. 2 or 3 seconds later, he swung himself back into the bus. Without saying a word, he immediately ran to the left side of the vehicle. Without wasting a second, he repeated the exact same actions. After finishing, he lightly patted me on the back. "Turn right." Hearing the certainty in his voice, I chose to trust him without hesitation. Without waiting for the countdown to end, I immediately turned toward the driver and gave my answer. "Right." This time, the driver finally did not shake his head. Instead, he quietly spoke. At the same moment, the loudspeaker came alive again. "The choice is correct. The current total number of wrong answers is 2. At last, I let out a sigh of relief. We were safe for the moment. After the 3rd round of choices ended, I couldn't help looking at Jason with astonishment. "Jason, how did you figure out the direction?" He also let out a relieved breath, smiled faintly, and explained. "Just now, I discovered that blood-covered arm used for punishment. Both times, it just happened to reach in from the direction corresponding to the wrong answer. Since the windows on both sides were already shattered, I simply climbed outside to see exactly where that bloody arm was positioned and whether it had anything to do with the answer. The first time, I climbed out through the right side window and didn't find anything. So I climbed onto the left side window instead. Sure enough, after sticking my head all the way up to the roof of the bus, I saw a faint silhouette of a hand crouching in wait along the edge of the roof, directly in front of me. That's why I guessed that the left side was most likely the wrong answer. While we were talking, the driver had already announced the person selected for the 4th round. This time, it was Ryan Walker's turn to choose a direction. Jason Reed once again climbed out through the left side window, nimbly clinging to the outside of the bus. The bloody arm is still on the left. Keep choosing right. Ryan Walker nodded and gave the answer to the driver. The loudspeaker crackled. Correct choice. Current accumulated wrong answers, 2. At that moment, watching Jason Reed swing about so effortlessly, both Ryan Walker and I were filled with admiration. Jason Reed, you're practically a superhero. 10 minutes later, the bus arrived at the station without incident. Arriving at stop 5. What a pity. 2 passengers died during the previous stage. 5 survivors remain. Thanks to Jason Reed's miraculous performance, all of our subsequent choices in this stage went incredibly smoothly. Every single one was correct. He was like a swallow, lightly hanging outside the window while continuously observing the movements of the bloody arm. There was no denying that Jason Reed was exceptionally agile. However, we barely had time to celebrate clearing the stage before a new set of rules came crashing down through the loudspeaker only seconds later. Congratulations on successfully clearing the stage. Bus rule number 5. All passengers are required to gather at the front section of the bus, near the driver's area. After hearing the announcement from the loudspeaker, I couldn't help feeling puzzled. Was this rule really that simple? What was so difficult about walking to the front of the bus? That said, we still followed the instruction immediately. Unexpectedly, after everyone had taken their positions, the loudspeaker sounded once again. The second half of the rule will now be announced. The middle section of the bus will be divided into 2, transforming into 2 corridors that extend all the way to the rear of the vehicle. Passengers must choose one of the 2 corridors and carefully make their way through to reach the back of the bus. After 5 minutes, anyone who has not reached the destination will die. As soon as the announcement ended, a blinding white flash suddenly appeared, temporarily robbing us of our vision. A few seconds later, we could barely make out the scene before us. Just moments ago, the bus had been filled with shattered seats and twisted metal debris. Now, it had truly transformed into 2 narrow corridors running along the left and right sides. The outer walls of both corridors were made entirely of glass. We could clearly see everything inside. The corridor on the left looked extremely dangerous. The floor seemed to have been hollowed out. Only a single narrow wooden beam hung suspended in the air, stretching all the way to the end. Along the walls were more than a dozen razor-sharp blades of varying sizes, constantly swinging and slashing back and forth. They repeatedly chopped down toward the area above the wooden beam. In other words, anyone wishing to pass through that route would not only have to cross a narrow balance beam but also survive a deadly gauntlet of blades. Meanwhile, the corridor on the right appeared far quieter. At first glance, there seemed to be nothing unusual about it. Not only was the floor solid and stable, but there also appeared to be no dangerous traps of any kind. But recalling the life-and-death ordeals of the previous stages, the calmer and safer a place appeared, the more likely it was to conceal deadly dangers. 5 minutes would pass very quickly. After a brief moment of thought, I turned to look at Ryan Walker and Jason Reed beside me. Do you guys have any ideas? Both of them shook their heads. However, just as the 3 of us were widening our eyes and carefully observing everything around us, one of the 2 remaining passengers suddenly stepped forward. He was a middle-aged man whose hair was already streaked with gray. After pondering for a moment, he walked straight toward the corridor that appeared safer. Everyone, I think you may be overcomplicating things. The man smiled calmly, already placing 1 foot inside the entrance to the corridor. You're all trapped in a fixed way of thinking, always trying to uncover some hidden mystery. But sometimes, doing that makes you miss the truth. Isn't it possible that these two corridors don't contain any hidden traps at all, and that this is simply a problem of limited capacity? Based on our previous experiences, there's a good chance that this passage only allows one or two people to get through before it closes, forcing everyone else to grit their teeth and take the deadly path on the left. Think about it. Doesn't that fit the pattern of the first 3 stages perfectly? The 4 of us fell into a brief silence, seriously considering the possibility of his theory. But clearly, the man had no intention of wasting any more time. He took the lead and strode into the right corridor. Trying to fight for it later would be the worst option. I'm not waiting around. I'll go first. But the moment he finished speaking, a crescent-shaped flash of light suddenly swept across his body. The man who had been overflowing with confidence only seconds ago collapsed to the floor within 3 or 4 seconds, unable to stand back up. There was only a thin bleeding cut on his body, yet his skin quickly turned dark and purplish. It was obvious that he had been poisoned. What? Ryan Walker sucked in a sharp breath. The right corridor actually has invisible blades. And they're coated with a deadly poison. Jason Reed's expression also became extremely serious. There are 2 paths laid out before us. One path is a narrow balance beam, along with blades that can be seen with the naked eye. The other path is solid ground, along with blades that are completely invisible. An atmosphere of despair once again settled over everyone's heads. Seeing that nearly half the time had already passed, the last remaining female passenger finally broke down. You 3, the difficulty of the left path is just too high. That wooden beam is so narrow. Under normal circumstances, I can barely walk across something like that, let alone deal with blades chopping down at me. If I want to make it through safely, I think my only option is to try my luck on the right side. If I run fast enough, maybe I'll be lucky enough to avoid the blade's attack patterns. After saying that, she took one final deep breath, squeezed her eyes shut, and dashed forward at her maximum speed. Unfortunately, after only running 2 or 3 steps past the entrance, she collapsed amid a horrific scream. She had followed the same fate as the middle-aged man before her. In the blink of an eye, only the final 2 minutes remained. At this point in the bus journey, aside from the 3 of us, every other passenger was dead. The cruel rules had transformed this already cramped bus into a living hell. And as for us, it seemed we would most likely come to an end here as well. After struggling to survive for so long, were we really going to die after all? My heart was filled with unwillingness, yet I truly could not find any way to reach the other side. Just as despair was about to crush my will completely, Ryan Walker suddenly stood up in front of the corridor entrance. I think I've discovered a pattern. A pattern? The moment he spoke, Jason Reed and I immediately moved closer. His words felt like a lifeline thrown to us in the depths of despair. We watched as Ryan Walker quickly took off his jacket, rolled it into a ball, and hurled it forcefully into the right corridor. I still need to conduct a few more tests before I can prove whether this idea is correct. The moment the bundle of clothes was thrown in, it was instantly shredded by the invisible blades. Fragments of the white jacket scattered all over the floor. Ryan Walker frowned as if deep in thought. Then he stretched out his hand behind him. Give me your jackets too. Although we had no idea what he was planning, we hurriedly took off our jackets and handed them over. After that, he repeated the exact same process, throwing all of our jackets into the corridor. The result was identical to before. Faced with that scene, both Jason Reed and I were completely confused. However, after the 3rd test was completed, the tightly furrowed brows that Ryan Walker had maintained all this time gradually relaxed. Just as I suspected. We might actually survive this. Hearing those words, both of us instantly perked up. Ryan Walker pointed toward the corridor on the left. When those 2 people attempted the challenge earlier, you were probably focused entirely on the right corridor where they entered and didn't pay attention to the left one. But if you observe both corridors at the same time, you'll notice something. Every time an invisible blade on the right side strikes an object and performs a cutting motion, a blade on the left side also swings to a corresponding position at exactly the same moment. The tests I just conducted completely confirmed my theory. In other words, both corridors are actually using an identical set of blades following exactly the same movement patterns. That's also the reason why the outer walls of the corridors were made entirely of transparent glass. When we move through the right corridor, we can directly observe the positions of the visible blades in the left corridor and use them to avoid the invisible blades. At last, Jason Reed and I understood. Simply choosing left or right would lead to death either way. The true solution to this stage was to use the left corridor as a reference point in order to evade the invisible blades attacking within the right corridor. Watch the left side, but walk through the right. At that moment, the overwhelming tension finally eased somewhat. Both Jason Reed and I let out sighs of relief. During the final minute, we constantly reminded one another of the blade positions. One after another, we made our way through the right corridor. Although the process was intense and exhausting, fortunately all three of us escaped with nothing more than a fright. After clearing the fifth stage, we were already on the verge of complete exhaustion when the loudspeaker sounded once again. Arriving at stop 6. What a pity. 2 passengers died during the previous stage. 3 survivors remain. Please be advised that stop 7 is approaching ahead. It is also the final stop of the Spirit Road bus. No further challenges will be set during this segment of the journey. Passengers are required to carefully observe the surrounding environment, memorize the nearby terrain, and pay close attention to all landmarks and visible information in order to locate the final escape destination. Bus rule number 6. After the bus arrives at the station, all passengers must disembark. Anyone who reaches the escape destination within 10 minutes will survive. Those who fail will die. After hearing the announcement, we immediately sprang to our feet. Not daring to waste even a second, each of us picked a direction, pressed ourselves against the windows, and stared intently outside. But as time slowly passed, all I could do was widen my eyes in frustration. The chaotic fog surrounding us never thinned in the slightest. Forget landmarks, I couldn't even see the road beneath us. And that wasn't all. When only 1 minute remained before arrival, the 3 of us gathered together for a quick discussion. The situation for the other 2 was exactly the same as mine. Neither of them had managed to discover anything useful. Even Jason Reed, who had the sharpest eyesight among us, could not clearly see anything beyond a distance of 1 meter. A soft chime announcing the station sounded. The driver brought the bus to a stop and opened the doors. We've reached the stop, everyone. Get off the bus. My shift is over. Amid the driver's eerie chuckling, the 3 of us stepped off the bus in confusion. What we didn't expect was that even after getting off, we still couldn't see any trace of the normal world. All around us were desolate, remote mountains. A dim road could vaguely be seen, but there was no way to tell where it led. Everything was wrapped in a dense layer of fog, fading in and out of sight. The road beneath our feet was even worse. There were no road signs to be found, nor any directional markers. On top of that, in front of us, behind us, to our left, and to our right, there were countless intersections packed together like a gigantic chessboard. It was practically a maze. We wandered aimlessly. In a place like this, we couldn't even spot another human being, let alone find the escape location mentioned in the rules. This time, even Ryan, who was always calm and composed, couldn't hide his discouragement. At this point, the 3 of us had failed to discover even the slightest clue. Even Ryan, the acknowledged top student of our group, no longer had the courage to keep solving the puzzle. The farther we walked, the more lost we became. We tried changing directions many times, yet still couldn't escape this bizarre wasteland. When we checked the time again, there were only 3 minutes left. Our physical strength was nearly exhausted as well. With great difficulty, we found a corner by the roadside and sat there half lying, half sitting, hoping to spend the final moments of our lives looking up at the sky together. Unfortunately, the fog here was so thick that we couldn't even make out the moon or the stars. But just as we were glancing around aimlessly, a strange thought suddenly crept into my mind. Wait a second. The rule earlier never actually said that the landmark had to be outside the bus, did it? The two of them stared at me blankly. What? I'm not completely sure either. It's just something that suddenly occurred to me. We've been walking for a very, very long time. Forget landmarks, almost everything around here looks exactly the same. Isn't the only thing that stands out in this world the bus that brought us here? If we're talking about a landmark, it seems like it's the only thing that qualifies. How about we take a gamble and go back the way we came? The two of them looked at me with extremely serious expressions. To my surprise, I realized they had already sprung to their feet at some point and were staring straight at me as I lay on the ground. What are you still lying there for? Let's go. After running for our lives for more than 2 minutes, we finally caught up with the countdown. In the final dozen seconds before time ran out, we returned to the place where we had first gotten off the bus. Sure enough, although the driver had claimed he was getting off work, he had actually remained parked in the same spot the entire time, silently waiting with the bus doors wide open. Without the slightest hesitation, the three of us immediately jumped back into the bus. And the moment we got on, the loudspeaker began broadcasting rapidly. Please remain seated after boarding. Welcome back to the Spirit Route bus. The driver casually shut the doors, gripped the steering wheel tightly, and started the engine as he turned the wheel. We continued moving endlessly through the hazy sea of fog. In my drowsy state, my mind became increasingly blurred. The scene before my eyes gradually turned unreal. It felt as though I had sunk into a dream. A faint news broadcast echoed in my ears, as if someone nearby was listening to the evening news. Next is a breaking news report from the city. At 9:42 p.m. tonight, a serious traffic accident occurred in the urban area. A bus carrying 58 passengers suddenly lost control and plunged down a mountainside. It subsequently caused a violent explosion. 21 passengers died at the scene. 34 passengers later died after rescue efforts failed. 3 passengers are still receiving emergency medical treatment. The specific cause of the accident is still under investigation by the Special Task Force.